Thank you. All right. So I haven't done this in about 3 years, and I have about 71 slides to go through, so we're going to speed run this. I hope you've had a good break, and I know it's like past the middle of the day already. It's mentally taxing. A lot of information is going in your heads. Just stay with me. We're going to get through this. There's an after party after two lectures after me, so we're going to get there. All right, so I'm going to be talking about applying object-oriented user experience design to break up complex game systems. And we're going to get to what that means in just a bit. I'm going to start my stopwatch here just so I can be aware of time. All right, so for those that don't know me, I'm Alex. Hey, I've been doing UX and product design for about 13 years now. The first half of my career was spent in product design, web design, startups, corporate stuff, boring stuff, honestly. Then I moved into games. I spent a bunch of years at Creative Assembly, where I contributed to a bunch of Total War games. It was fun. Then I moved on to Hypixel Studios, where I worked on, sadly, the now cancelled Hytale. Nowadays, you can find me at Raw Power Games, where I'm contributing to our recently announced first upcoming game, Chronicles Medieval, hopefully launching in early access next year. And yeah, let's get right into it. All right, so folks, things used to be simpler. Games have reached a state of complexity that, honestly, is hard to fathom. There are still plenty of titles whose core loop revolves around one or two systems expressed through a limited number of player actions. But if we take a look at any of the large, big-budget games nowadays, and especially those released in the past decade, we'll be hard-pressed to find one that keeps things simple or small. The fact of the matter is that gameplay is built upon dozens and dozens of intertwined systems, giving players unprecedented variety in how they engage with them. From the core minute-to-minute play of combat, traversal, and exploration through multifaceted progression systems influencing core play via leveling, crafting, trading, and building, among others, to extensive personalization options and character creation, meta progressions, and rankings and social interactions. Games have never been bigger and more complex. And that begs the question, even if we reduce the scope severely or were to focus on just a few of these systems, how would we approach designing the user experience within them? Where and how do we start UXing, essentially? Now, probably we're going to start with a well-established workflow, one that most of us in here are very, very acutely familiar with. Let's go with an example. We receive a design brief, a GDD, for a player identity system in an online multiplayer game. It outlines a number of ways for players to express themselves, facilitate their social standing, and create bonds with other players. They can do that by customizing the look and curating the content of a number of UI components that we can see here: the character's nameplate, their player card, their profile page. These components are meant to be shown in different gameplay contexts and can include a variety of elements, such as an avatar image, gameplay statistics, achievements, earned titles, badges, the list goes on. We're also lucky enough that our designers provided us some reference images, so we can see a nameplate from Guild Wars 2, a player card from Apex Legends, and a profile from Final Fantasy XIV. So, most of us are likely to follow a similar well-established UX workflow when we receive this design doc. Now, you're all aware of this, but we're still gonna go through it. So, we conduct preliminary research, right, and a competitive analysis. We analyze the brief, discuss it with game designers and stakeholders to get a better understanding of the goals of the system, how it connects to other parts of the game, and how we expect players will engage with it. We even draft a bunch of player stories that outline the core interactions and their outcomes. Now, this seems like a solid foundation to work off of, so we begin designing flows. But which flow do we start with? Maybe we pick the one we believe players will engage the most with, or the simplest and most straightforward one to prove out some of the core interactions, like picking what content to show in a UI element. Regardless, our starting point is how players use the system, and we design our flows around that. Soon we have a number of flows that cover the most frequent cases, as well as some of the edge cases that have popped up. Before we know it, we're looking at a canvas full of lines and arrows and boxes. It's exciting. We move on to translating these wireframes and these into wireframes and interactive prototypes. We do some internal testing, we discover a few new unexpected cases, as it often happens. Some mistakes also pop up. We go through a round of iterations. At one point, we do a design review, we shake hands and agree that we have a solid UX design of the player identity system that we feel is ready to be put in game, or at least a version of it. It's fantastic stuff. So, what do? Well, we organize a kickoff meeting with our development team to discuss how we're going to implement this and do a handover. And the questions start popping up. What type of content objects can a player curate in their player card? Number one, oops. Will they be able to add more than one of the same type? For example, 3 achievements? What are the attributes and data we show for achievements? What about other objects? And you can start seeing the problem here. This is a bit of a trap. Many of us, including game, system, UI, and UX designers, and myself as well, fall into this trap of designing by first imagining the player's interactions, how they discover and acquire a thing, how they use it, how they share it, etc., etc. And that seems logical, you know? After all, games are the interactive medium. Surely figuring out the actions first is the right way to go. And sometimes it can be. But prioritizing interactions is only a step in the design of a system. We need to consider the objects, data, and relations that make up the system first, though. You know, the very things that players will interact with. Bear with me. Consider this. For a player to understand a crafting system and make an item with it, they must first understand what they can craft, the recipes, right? What will be consumed when they craft the materials, where they craft the crafting station, what they will produce, the crafted item that will be the result of their work with its attributes, and the relationship between all of these objects in their mental model. Or, if you prefer sports terms, for a Liverpool midfield player to understand Jurgen Klopp's new tactical play, they need to understand the ball, the goal, the other players, their roles, and the relationships between them. Ask yourself, how many times have you started a new game which expected you to take actions before you knew the where, the what, and the why? Yeah, but worry not. There is a better way, or an alternative way. It's all about perspective, right? And it's called object-oriented UX design. Now, it's important to note here, I did not create this methodology. It's been out there for more than 10 years. I've adopted it, I've used it, it's very popular in product design out there. I'm just here to advocate for its use in games UX design. We have Sophia Prater to thank for the creation of this methodology, which she did back in 2015, and she partially based it on designer and engineer Dave Collins's 1995 book, Designing Object-Oriented User Interfaces. So, you know, it's like 30 years ago that the start of this has been given. Okay, so object-oriented UX design provides a framework for breaking up the complexity of a system by focusing first on defining its objects and then designing the actions. Similar to the object-oriented programming approach that engineers apply when building complex software, which is meant to be actively updated and maintained. OOUX postulates that people think in noun-verb, not verb-noun pairs. For example, when navigating, people focus on objects, nouns, not on actions, the verbs. It doesn't matter if they're navigating digital content, a list of crafting recipes, or navigating in a physical digital environment. People focus on objects, a particular recipe, a category of recipes, an ingredient, or a city, a landmark, a building. They think of where they want to go or what they want to do first. Only after do they consider the action of how, the verb, to do it. An object-oriented design is easier to translate in an object-oriented person's headspace. When players can perceive, name, and categorize the objects within the systems we design, they can quickly move on to actually using those systems. An object-oriented design provides a foundation that sets us up for success. When this doesn't mean that we shouldn't consider or design interactions. On the contrary, it's just that by applying this methodology, we're setting a strong foundation on which we can build and design those interactions and that functionality. Okay, so obvious question is like, how do we do that? That's where object mapping comes in. So, many of you have already adopted and are using design systems in your workflows. And while a reusable design system is invaluable, and you may be very tempted to start applying it right ahead, the components, patterns, and modules of that system don't really hold any meaning for a player unless they're backed by a system of real-world objects that matches the player's mental model. Again, focus first on designing the system of real-world objects, then on designing a system of implementation to bring it all to life. And this is where object mapping comes in. In the following step-by-step case study, I'm going to show you how we can... Okay. No. I'm going to show you how we can build out an object map for a game system, which we're going to visually document by presenting its objects, their attributes, or properties, if you want, the relationships between those objects, and the actions that players can do with them. You know, notice me putting actions at the end. This is the important takeaway from this presentation. If nothing else, remember that. Okay. So the first exercise is extracting nouns to determine our building blocks. What that means is that we're going to go back to our game design brief, but we're going to focus only on the part that specifies the profile page that we need to design. So let's go through the brief together. Each player has a profile page where they can showcase their accomplishments and customize it to express their personality. Okay, good summary. We got a bunch of stories. Players can curate the content of their pages with a selection of titles, achievements, and statistics. Players can style their profiles by changing the background and posing their character. And players can browse the profiles of other players, compare their accomplishments, commenting on their look, and establishing social connections. This is where you take a yellow marker, if you like working in the analog world, or take out the highlight tool in Figma or Miro or whatever you work, and you start highlighting nouns that you think can be the building blocks of your system. So let's do that, very quick, right? It's gonna take you a little bit longer, but power of technology here. Now, you see that I've highlighted player, profile page, titles, achievements, and statistics, background, posing, even though posing is a verb, character, and then commenting, but I've only focused on comment. I've also specifically missed some nouns. The thing is that recognizing nouns is usually first grade simple task, but extracting objects does require some subtle art. Now, we're gonna pay special attention to nouns that keep popping up, like player and profile page. We can see this several times. These are likely to be important objects in our system. We're gonna ignore abstract nouns like personality, as that describes a fluffy concept that we hope will emerge from our system, not a tangible object that will be part of it. We ignore accomplishments because this is simply a collection of other objects. We can watch out for other words like, I don't know, a map or a grid. These are usually just fancy list views or like layout specific descriptions of a core object. And we can also infer objects from an action. Hence, commenting. Commenting is a verb, but if we highlight just the comment part, we obviously will need some sort of a comment object in our system. So we take all of these nouns and we put them on nice blue stickies, like that. By the end of this exercise, we have the building blocks of our player identity system, and they're expressed as clear objects. They cannot be removed from the system without losing its core value. Simple. Next, we need to determine the content of those objects, the most granular elements that make them up. First, we start with core elements. Now, core elements refer to attributes that are unique identifiers of an object, and they define it as a unique occurrence. These can be text strings, like a name or a description, or media, like an icon, an image, a 3D model, etc. So, we go back to our board of stickies, and we're going to use the achievement object as an example. So let's try and define the core elements for the achievement. We're going to have a name, right? Achievements need names. We're going to have a description, which is basically how you unlock and earn that achievement. And a badge icon, because we want and need this to be visual, to be properly representable to players. We visualize core elements with yellow stickies. And we can also give examples of them. So like name, go outside, description, don't play for 5 years, you know. Basically, try and provide a little bit more context, even at this level, for other people that you're going to be showing this later on and communicating with. Next, we gotta do the metadata. Metadata is information that helps the player get additional context about an object. It's usually structured and can be used to sort and filter instances. Now for our achievement, an example of metadata would be the date at which the player earned that achievement, or the percent of other players that have also earned it. We can also have some other examples, you know, like the rarity of a game item, whether it's common, uncommon, legendary, that's again metadata. Metadata we visualize with red stickies. So we continue this exercise. We continue adding yellow stickies to define the core elements of our objects. The player obviously has a name. Remember, it's an online multiplayer game, so we're gonna need some kind of a unique account identifier. And titles, they have a label, they have an objective, which is how we acquire the title. Statistics, they're made up of a label and a numerical value. And comments have text. These are the core elements. If you remove those core elements for these objects don't really exist anymore in our system. Now, you might be asking, okay, but what about the profile page, the background, the character, and the pose? Relevant questions. See, if we think about background, what is a background, right? It's just an image. There's no other essential data to it, no other elements. But we know that it is an inseparable part of our design requirement because players need to be able to change their backgrounds on their profile page. So we're gonna recontextualize it, and the background is gonna become an element, a core element of the profile page. Same with pose. Pose by itself is not an object, it is inherently connected to the character model. So we just reshuffle them. And then we have background image as a profile page, a background image is an element of the profile page, and the pose is an element of the character. All right, we continue adding metadata. We get social status for player, we get statistics, etc. All good things. We continue designing each object like that, and you can either do this by yourself, or you can do it with a group of stakeholders. In any case, this is a good step for early conversations around what makes up each object, which can help avoid changes down the line, as well as focusing the conversation on the actual content versus how it is expressed. Now, do consider that, you know, these objects do not exist in a vacuum. They populate the same system, which means that they probably have relationships between them. They relate to one another. So next we need to map those relationships. And let's go back to our stickies, now defined like this. This is where things get real fun, at least for me. So starting with one object, let's consider how each of the other objects can nest in it. And we're gonna go with the profile page first. And we've already established this is an object. It has a core element that's a background image. But we also know that we want players to be able to curate content in the profile page. So we want them to show titles, statistics, and achievements in it, right? After all, we need them to have a way to showcase their hard-earned and exemplary achievements and titles and statistics. So we establish a relationship by placing those objects underneath our profile page in the same column. But we also need to define the cardinality of nested objects. That is, the number of times a nested object can occur in a host object. We do this by adding these little statements. Has 0, 1 title, has 0 to many achievements, has 0 to 3 statistics. This is how we express the cardinality. However, cardinality by itself is not enough because we also need intentionality. So let's add the other one, profile page. It has 1 character and it also has 0 to many comments, right? So next we need to provide the intentionality. So, you know, if we take one step further, we describe the nature of the relationship between the objects. For example, instead of just a profile page has 0 to many comments, we add 0 to many comments posted by other players. And this way we're already inferring some of the actions that are gonna happen in our system. And we can also start to expose the intentionality of our system. It's the same thing with statistics. it has 0 to 3 statistics listed by players. Why listed by players? Well, because in our case, we want players to select the statistics shown on their player cards by themselves instead of auto-populating them by an algorithm. So we will need an action where players will be able to sift through their statistics and choose which one they want to put in there. We continue doing this for other objects, and some objects are not going to have any other nested objects below them, and that's okay. You know, to borrow a term from atomic design, if you can think about our core elements in metadata as our atoms, then the objects that don't have anything nested in them are our molecules, and when they're nested in other objects, those become our templates or organism. So far, so good. We're doing great. I am doing great. I have 10 more minutes, judging by my stopwatch. And I'm already halfway through, so like it's exciting. The next step that we need to go through is force ranking. This is another great opportunity to get around with stakeholders and designers. And the purpose of this exercise is to take all the stuff that we so far defined in our nice, neat, tight columns with our colorful stickies and do prioritization by force ranking each element and choosing the ones that are most important and putting them at the top. This will be extremely helpful when we move on to designing wireframes and prototypes, because it will already provide us a very clear hierarchy that we can then translate into our visual layouts. So let's do just that. We're going to take the achievement first. It's my favorite example in here. So while prioritizing, imagine which elements will be most important to your users, which bits are must-have information and which are nice to have. When considering metadata, think about the most important sorting and filtering mechanisms. So this is our unsorted, unprioritized column in here. Now, in our game, we want achievements to be presented very visually. So their badge icon will have a lot more importance in whatever design we make. We also want to stimulate players comparing themselves to one another and provide opportunity for boasting. Hence why we want to put high priority on the percentages of players that have earned that achievement. So we put these at the top of the column, and that's how we prioritize this. Again, you go through every single object and you do the same exercise, sit around with stakeholders, with designers, with UXers, discuss and rank. Fact of the matter is that designers are probably going to come in and they're already going to have an idea of the priority that they want for these elements in the system. But you also want to have a bunch of UXers besides yourself so that you can balance out the conversation and you have a proper representation of the player on the table. Right, so we come here. This is looking wonderful. There's a lot of stuff in here. We're almost done, but we still need to define how players interact with our objects that we've just finished mapping. And that's the next step. So now that we have our detailed map, we have our objects, our attributes, their relations, let's start thinking about these interactions. Again, another opportunity to involve people from different teams. You can also bring in tech people for this one as well. Brainstorm on what players can do with these objects, and essentially you have a conversation about the functionality of the system, but within the helpful context of the existing object mapping framework we've created. Also, if you get a resistance from producers or directors, which is likely to happen on the necessity of this, argue that this collaborative activity will ensure that everyone is on the same page and help reduce the amount of unknowns and iterations, keeping your UX team on a predictable timeline along with other teams as well. Okay, so let's quickly do it. Looking at the profile page object, we can see it has a nested achievement object, right? We can easily imagine a use case in which a player is inspecting another player's profile page and they see their showcased achievements. That player might want to compare their progress towards one of the listed achievements, or they might find it presents a challenge they'd like to tackle, so they would look for a way to pin and track it. Or maybe they didn't even know such an achievement existed and want to share it with their friend and tell them, hey, did you know this was in the game? You know, let's go and do it. So all of these interactions, compare, track, share, are valid, and we can list them in the achievement objects column with green stickies. I know it's not in the same column, but I don't have the vertical space in here, and this needs to remain somewhat readable. But when you're doing this, put the green stickies in the same column, all right? So we then do the same for each of the objects. So we can do it for the profile page as well. So you'll notice that I also have some labels, as owner, as viewer. That's because actions are contextual. So If you're on your profile page as an owner, you can curate content, you can change the background, you can pose a character. But if you're viewing another player's profile page, obviously you can't do that, but you can post a comment maybe, or you can choose to add them as a friend. And this is also where things get interesting, because in the process of adding actions, you may uncover that some of these can imply new objects which we haven't mapped before. That's perfectly normal and in fact expected. So brainstorming interactions can spawn new objects, and as always, you should be prepared to iterate. So in this case, add friend. You know, we've not really talked about a friend object before. And adding a friend implies the existence of such an object. This is a good time to discuss whether this object, though, falls in the scope of the player identity system. If we want players to display their favorite friends in their profile pages, it will. But in case that we just want a shortcut interaction that links to another system that we have, our friends and parties system, that's where it should exist. So we need to be very clear about, hey, is this a new object that we're going to add, or is this just a link action that's going to take us somewhere else? And as a bonus step, once we've gone through all of the objects and have added their interactions, we can create an additional interaction matrix where we can capture more detailed information about each interaction. Things like who will trigger the interaction, the owner of the object, a viewer, someone with a special permission or a role. What's the reason for this interaction? What is its purpose in the context of the player experience? Are there any conditions for these interactions to be available? And does this interaction refer to another system? And finally, because we've done so much work until now, and we have such a good clear mapping, we can use that to create a shared glossary where we can include all of our extracted objects, add brief descriptions of what they are, what their intent is, which can be referenced by all teams and stakeholders involved with the system's design and implementation. And trust me, your colleagues are gonna absolutely love you for it. You're gonna be establishing a shared terminology, and you're gonna have the same language when you're referring to the system when you're designing it. So, what's the conclusion and what we can take away? Well, we can now look at the work we've done, and we see a clear object-based foundation for our player identity system. It is not a proof of record, nor is it a final design. It doesn't answer how players will carry out the interaction in detail or their complexity. That's what flows and prototypes for, after all. But the player experience that we are designing for will now be based on a solid and organized foundation. It will have an understandable framework. It will provide an understandable framework for continued conversation. It will set us up for seamless collaboration with fellow designers, with stakeholders, and with developers. And last but not least, it's easily scalable thanks to a clear object mapping model. And I think I'm right on time. So if you want to learn more about object-oriented UX, go to OOUX.com, and you can find me on Blue Sky and on LinkedIn. And I had one more slide after this, but this presentation is not updated, so we're all good. Thank you. I can receive questions.
Thank you, Alex. We have one question, two, okay, they're coming in. Throughout the process, have you been in situations where the sticky notes table keeps changing? New features get added, designers change their mind, etc.
Absolutely, yes. And again, this is where the last point of the takeaway comes from. It changes. It doesn't, I mean, sometimes it changes after we've gone to prototyping stage. Sometimes it changes after we've implemented in game because, you know, proper user testing has now happened and we get feedback and we go back. But the thing is, when we have the clear object map, it's a lot easier to do changes because it's a lot easier to track what relations you're gonna change, what hierarchy is gonna be updated, and where you can fit in the new things that you need to add.
And how would one introduce, let's keep moving. All right, this is an upvoted one, so I have to ask this one first. Do the engineers directly use these objects in their work? Do they ever not? Does this process require being consistent with all code at all times?
So in my experience, the earlier you bring engineers to the table, the more likely they are that they're gonna follow the structure. You know, for those of you, I don't know how many of you here have a technical background, but providing such a mapped out system of objects to engineers is invaluable to them. Like, it saves them a lot of work to think about how they're gonna structure and approach the implementation. So I've never really had resistance from them. I forgot the second part of the question.
Me too.
Okay, second part you can ask me later.
Okay, last one. How would you introduce OOUX in a pre-existing process and project already in production?
Oof. I mean, you gotta find early buy. Like, the way that I do it usually is I try to build personal relationships in my work environment, and then I quote unquote exploit those personal relationships to build to gather advocacy and helpers for whatever I want to put through. So if you manage to have the right people and you manage to have good connections with at least one person from the teams that are gonna be involved with such a thing, so production for sure, definitely. You want producers to be your best friends, trust me on that. But also tech implementation, game design, and you get them, you can run them once through this on a very small feature, something that's not that high of a priority, for example, where you have more space and time to think about it. And you basically walk them through and show them the value of it. Then you can use those people to be advocates for that methodology and spread the word around and more easily sell it to the rest of the organization.
All right, thank you so much. Give him a round of applause.